R1. You've never seen it happen, never felt it. But right now, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, a ship captain's radio just turned to static. A ham radio operator in Kansas lost contact with his buddy in Japan mid-sentence. An airline pilot flying over the Arctic heard her communication frequency dissolve into crackling noise. The sun just burped, and for the next hour, invisible chaos is unfolding in the sky above us. An R1 radio blackout is the weakest on the scale, but don't let that fool you into thinking it's harmless. These events happen dozens of times during each solar cycle, caused by M-class solar flares, moderate eruptions on the sun's surface that send a pulse of X-rays racing toward Earth at the speed of light. 8 minutes after the flare erupts, those X-rays slam into the day side of our planet. The ionosphere absorbs this extra energy and temporarily gets more ionized, which sounds good until you realize it's like turning up the gain on a radio amplifier until everything distorts. High-frequency radio communications on the sunlit side of Earth degrade. Mariners trying to communicate ship to ship might notice their signals getting scratchy. Ham radio enthusiasts lose contact with their long-distance buddies. Aviation communications get fuzzy but remain mostly functional. The disruption lasts maybe an hour, two at most, then fades as the ionosphere recovers. For most people, it's completely invisible. You don't notice your Uber driver had slightly worse GPS accuracy. You don't realize the cargo ship crossing the Pacific had to switch communication frequencies. It's background noise in the system, easily compensated for by redundancies and alternative methods. Somewhere, a Coast Guard station briefly loses contact with a fishing vessel. A weather station in the Arctic experiences data corruption. Remote operations feel the pinch first, those thin communication threads stretched across vast distances suddenly going slack. The amateur radio community notices immediately, tracking propagation conditions and sharing reports on forums about which frequencies still work and which have gone silent. Pilots report the effects casually, experiencing some HF interference. Air traffic controllers acknowledge it, note it in logs, move on. The maritime industry has seen thousands of these events. Ship captains know to switch frequency, try different bands, wait it out. The redundancy is built into every system specifically because R1 events are so common. About 2,000 R1 events happen during an average 11-year solar cycle. They're the common cold of space weather, annoying but manageable. Airports don't close, ships don't run aground. Emergency services keep functioning, the world keeps spinning. But R1 is just the sun clearing its throat. What happens when it starts shouting? That's when professionals start to worry. R2. Now we're talking about solar flares powerful enough to make professionals nervous. An R2 blackout comes from stronger M-class flares, packing more punch, lasting longer. The high-frequency radio blackout on the sunlit side of Earth intensifies. Maritime communication becomes spotty at best, impossible at worst. Ships lose contact with shore stations for tens of minutes at a time. Aircraft flying polar routes where they rely heavily on HF radio since there are no ground-based alternatives experience communication losses lasting up to an hour. This is where the aviation industry starts sweating. Planes flying over the Arctic or Antarctic can't use normal communication satellites because of geometry. Those satellites orbit above the equator, and polar regions are too far north or south for good coverage. Instead, pilots rely on HF radio bounced off the ionosphere. During an R2 blackout, that lifeline goes dead. Pilots have to reroute, sometimes hundreds of miles out of their way, just to stay within range of communication station. Flights get delayed, fuel costs spike. Passengers wonder why their 12-hour flight just became 13 hours, and nobody tells them it's because the sun decided to have a mood swing. The economics start to hurt here. An extra hour of flight time means more fuel burned, more crew hours logged, tighter turnaround schedules missed. Multiply that across dozens of polar flights daily, and R2 events cost airlines millions per occurrence. The passengers never know. The booking systems don't explain it. The delay just shows up as weather or air traffic control. Search and rescue operations feel the strain during R2 events. Coast Guard helicopters coordinating with ships lose their communication links. Emergency beacons transmit distress signals that can't be relayed properly. Those critical minutes of silence can mean the difference between life and death for people stranded at sea or lost in remote wilderness areas. Navigation systems degrade too. GPS gets wonkier as the ionosphere's changing density bends radio signals in unpredictable ways. Precision approaches at airports become sketchy. The difference between landing smoothly and going around for another attempt might come down to whether the sun fired off a flare 93 million miles away 8 minutes ago. About 350 R2 events occur per solar cycle. Still manageable, still routine for space weather forecasters, but now we're entering territory where real money gets lost and safety margins start to thin. But if you think losing radio contact for an hour is bad, wait until the ionosphere stops cooperating entirely. R3. The sun just threw a serious punch, and Earth's communication infrastructure is staggering. R3 blackouts come from X-class solar flares, the big leagues of solar eruptions. When one of these monsters detonates on the sun's surface, the burst of X-rays that hits Earth is intense enough to fundamentally alter the ionosphere's structure. The entire sunlit hemisphere experiences a complete HF radio blackout. Not degraded communications, not scratchy signals, complete silence. Every ship in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans within the daylight zone loses long-range communication simultaneously. Emergency broadcasts go nowhere. Distress calls vanish into the void. Aviation over the oceans and poles goes dark. Air traffic controllers can't reach planes. Pilots can't reach each other. For an hour, maybe two, these aircraft are on their own, relying on pre-flight plans and hoping nothing goes wrong, because if it does, calling for help isn't an option. Think about what that means practically. A pilot encounters severe turbulence over the North Atlantic. Normally, they'd radio for permission to change altitude, coordinate with nearby aircraft, and update their flight plan. During an R3 event, they're making those decisions alone, hoping the math is right, hoping nobody else had the same idea at the same time. The invisible safety net vanishes. Military operations become dangerously complicated. Fighter jets on patrol can't communicate positions. Submarines lose contact with command. Intense geopolitical regions, an aircraft that can't respond to radio challenges creates situations that could escalate rapidly. The protocols designed to prevent conflict through clear communication suddenly become unreliable. GPS accuracy tanks. The ionosphere is supposed to be predictable enough that GPS receivers can compensate for the signal delays it causes. During an R3 event, all bets are off. The ionosphere churns like a stormy sea, bending signals in ways that confuse the math. Errors that are normally measured in feet balloon to tens of meters or worse. Self-driving cars relying on centimeter-accurate GPS suddenly can't tell which lane they're in. Survey equipment gives wildly incorrect readings. Military targeting systems lose precision. Low-frequency navigation systems used by submarines and ships experience increased noise and reduced range. Emergency services relying on specific radio frequencies for coordination struggle to maintain contact. Amateur radio operators, the backbone of emergency communications during disasters, find their entire high-frequency spectrum useless. About 175 R3 events happen per solar cycle. They're common enough that protocols exist, rare enough that they still disrupt operations worldwide. Airlines reroute thousands of flights. Shipping companies adjust schedules. The economic cost runs into millions of dollars per event. And this isn't even the worst it gets, because when the sun really loses its temper, systems don't just fail, they break down completely. R4. Imagine this. The sun erupts with an X-class flare so powerful, it makes R3 events look like flashlight flickers. We're talking about a flare in the top tier of X-class, maybe an X10, X20, a solar explosion releasing the energy equivalent of billions of nuclear bombs in minutes. The ionosphere on Earth's day side doesn't just get disrupted, it gets shredded. HF radio communications worldwide across the entire sunlit hemisphere go completely dark for hours, not minutes, hours. Every maritime channel, every aviation frequency, every emergency service, every military communication that relies on HF radio, all of it goes silent simultaneously. The blackout is so complete that backup systems fail because they rely on the same physical mechanism, the ionosphere, which is currently non-functional. Hundreds of aircraft flying transoceanic and polar routes lose all communication for extended periods. The safety protocols that normally protect these flights assume communication is possible. When it's not, pilots are flying on instruments and prayers, hoping their navigation systems are accurate enough, hoping no other aircraft are on a collision course, hoping that if something goes wrong, they can troubleshoot it alone. The psychological toll on pilots during these events is rarely discussed publicly. You're responsible for hundreds of lives flying over an ocean with no landmarks, no contact with ground control, no ability to coordinate with other aircraft. Every decision is final. Every malfunction must be handled without consultation. The training prepares you for it, but the reality is isolating in ways passengers never understand. Disaster response becomes nearly impossible. When hurricanes strike or earthquakes hit during R4 events, the amateur radio networks that normally provide emergency communications go silent. FEMA can't coordinate with field teams. The National Guard loses contact with relief convoys. The moment when communication matters most becomes the moment it fails completely. GPS doesn't just degrade, it becomes unreliable enough that critical systems have to switch to backup navigation. Ships revert to celestial navigation if they still have people trained in it. Military operations that depend on GPS-guided munitions lose accuracy. Infrastructure that relies on GPS timing signals, which is more systems than you'd think, including power grids and financial networks, starts experiencing synchronization errors. The economic impact is staggering. Airlines cancel or delay thousands of flights. Shipping routes get disrupted. Search and rescue operations get hampered. The cascading failures ripple through logistics networks, causing delays that compound over days. R4 events happen about 8 times per solar cycle. They're rare, but not rare enough. And every time one hits, we're reminded how fragile our communication infrastructure really is. How much we've built on top of a thin layer of ionized gas that only exists because the sun allows it to. But there's one more level. One final category where infrastructure doesn't just fail, it shatters. And it's already happened before. R5. The sun has gone apocalyptic. An R5 radio blackout is caused by the most extreme X-class solar flares, events at the absolute top of the solar fury spectrum. We're talking X20, X30, maybe even higher. These are flares so powerful that when astronomers detect them, there's a moment of stunned silence before everyone starts calculating just how badly this is about to hurt. The ionosphere on the daylight side of Earth doesn't just malfunction. It transforms into something unrecognizable, so over-ionized, so chaotic, so utterly disrupted that HF radio communication becomes impossible across half the planet for hours, potentially an entire day. Every single system that relies on the ionosphere for radio propagation fails simultaneously, worldwide, with no exceptions and no workarounds. Global aviation grinds to a halt. Transoceanic flights can't launch because there's no way to maintain communication. Planes already in flight are on their own, completely isolated, following predetermined routes and hoping nothing goes wrong because if it does, there's no one to call. Polar routes shut down entirely. The FAA, EASA, and every aviation authority worldwide issue blanket restrictions because flying without communication capability violates every safety regulation ever written. The ripple effects hit immediately. Airports from JFK to Heathrow to Singapore start seeing massive delays. Flights scheduled to cross the Atlantic or Pacific get grounded. Passengers stranded in terminals demand explanations that gate agents can't really give. Solar weather event sounds like science fiction, but it's the reason thousands of people will miss connections, meetings, weddings, funerals. The economic disruption compounds by the hour. Maritime operations collapse into chaos. Ships in the middle of oceans lose all long-range communication. Navies can't coordinate fleet movements. Coast guards can't respond to distress calls. Container ships carrying billions of dollars in cargo navigate blindly, relying on outdated methods and hoping they don't collide with something in the dark. Imagine you're a cargo ship captain in the middle of the Pacific when an R5 hits. Your radio goes dead. Your satellite link fails. GPS starts giving you positions that drift hundreds of meters between readings. You have no way to know if the shipping lane you're following is clear. No way to call for help if your engines fail. No way to warn others if you encounter a hazard. You're commanding a vessel the size of a city block, and you're suddenly navigating like it's 1850. The maritime industry moves $14 trillion in goods annually. When R5 events disrupt that flow, even for a day, the consequences ripple through global supply chains for weeks. Manufacturing plants waiting for components shut down production lines. Retailers expecting inventory shipments face empty shelves. Just-in-time logistics, the backbone of modern commerce, assumes communication and navigation work. When they don't, the entire system strains. GPS fails catastrophically. The ionospheric distortions are so severe that position errors reach hundreds of meters. Autonomous vehicles stop working. Precision agriculture equipment fails. Drone deliveries halt. Financial systems that use GPS for time synchronization experience glitches. Power grids struggle to maintain phase synchronization across long distance. Emergency services that dispatched vehicles based on GPS coordinates send responders to the wrong locations. The GPS timing dependency is something most people never think about. High-frequency trading systems use GPS clocks to timestamp transactions with nanosecond precision. Cell phone towers use GPS timing to coordinate handoffs between cells. 4G and 5G networks rely on it for synchronization. Power companies use it to match the phase of AC current across vast distances. When that timing goes haywire during an R5 event, systems that seem completely unrelated to navigation start experiencing failures. Nuclear power plants rely on GPS timing for safety system synchronization. When it fails, backup protocols activate, but the communication infrastructure designed to manage emergencies becomes unreliable. Financial markets experience trading halts as timestamp integrity collapses. The International Space Station loses ground contact, forcing astronauts into autonomous operations procedures. Low-frequency navigation systems used as backups experience such severe interference they become unusable. Amateur radio, the emergency communication method of last resort during disasters, goes completely silent. If a major disaster occurred during an R5 event, coordinating rescue efforts would be nightmarishly difficult. Think about that scenario. A major earthquake hits California during an R5 blackout. Emergency services can't use GPS to navigate to disaster sites. They can't coordinate via HF radio. Cell towers are experiencing timing issues. The systems that would normally orchestrate rescue operations across multiple agencies are partially or completely offline. First responders would be operating with communications technology from decades ago, trying to save lives in a modern disaster. The economic cost runs into billions, not millions, billions. Airlines lose revenue. Shipping companies face delays. Insurance claims pile up. The stock market reacts to the uncertainty with volatility. Supply chains built on just-in-time delivery schedules start experiencing shortages as shipments miss their windows. And here's the terrifying part. This has happened before. The Carrington event of 1859, the most powerful solar storm in recorded history, likely produced R5 level radio blackouts, though radio technology was too primitive to measure it properly. If that event happened today, we'd experience not just radio blackouts, but power grid failures, satellite damage, and infrastructure disruptions that would take months to repair fully. Telegraph operators in 1859 reported sparks flying from their equipment. Some claimed they could send messages even with batteries disconnected, powered purely by the electrical currents induced in the telegraph wires by the magnetic storm. In today's interconnected world, those same electromagnetic effects would overwhelm circuit breakers, fry transformers, and potentially black out entire continents. The Halloween storms of 2003 produced R4 and borderline R5 events. Aviation suffered massive disruptions. GPS systems worldwide experienced significant errors. Communication satellites went offline. Swedish power systems experienced failures. And we got lucky. If those flares had hit a day earlier when Earth was in a different position relative to the Sun, the impacts could have been far worse. Space weather forecasters watched the Halloween storms with a mixture of fascination and dread. The X-rays arrived first, causing the radio blackouts. Then came the coronal mass ejection, a billion-ton cloud of plasma that took days to reach Earth. When it hit, the auroras were visible as far south as Texas and the Mediterranean. Beautiful to watch, devastating to technology. We've built our entire modern civilization on the assumption that R5 events are rare anomalies, extreme outliers that we can absorb and recover from. But the geological record suggests they're more common than we'd like to believe. And each time one occurs, we have more infrastructure at risk, more systems dependent on space-based technology, more single points of failure. The sun doesn't care about our assumptions. It's a roiling ball of nuclear fury 93 million miles away, and every so often, it reminds us that we live at its mercy. We have satellites watching it, algorithms predicting its behavior, early warning systems to give us those precious 8 minutes between flare detection and impact. But 8 minutes isn't enough time to prevent anything. It's barely enough time to warn people, to ground flights, to alert operators, to brace for the blackout, and then the radio goes silent, the GPS drifts, and we remember that for all our technology, we're still just inhabitants of a rocky planet orbiting a star that could, at any moment, decide to remind us exactly who's in charge.